ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar, my dear friends. How vasanas, our karma, they are affecting our life. Each of our actions, physical, mental, or verbal, creates an impression in the mind. Everything we do is stored in the mind in the form of subtle impressions or saṁskāras, which at the end becomes vasanas. We perform our actions under the spell of these subtle impressions, and in turn our actions reinforce these subtle impressions. Subtle impressions engender roaming tendencies, and these roaming tendencies in turn strengthen the subtle impressions. This process is known as karma chakra, the wheel of karma. Once in motion, this wheel revolves at an ever increasing velocity. The wheel of karma has three distinct components: the thought, vritti, that propels the action, the impression, saṁskāra, created by that thought, and the ensuing action, and the next round, chakra, of action propelled by the saṁskāra. Thus, another name for the wheel of karma is vritti saṁskāra chakra. This concept is the ground for understanding the law of karma. If we take a closer look at how we create our personal wheel of karma, we will begin to see what a profound effect it has on all aspects of our lives. Our actions are propelled primarily by our desires. The stronger the desire, the more intense the action arising from it. The intensity of the action and the number of times it is repeated determine the strength of the subtle impressions. As time passes, the subtle impressions of our action becomes strong enough to manifest as habits. For example, we receive a box of Belgian chocolates, and as we rarely eat sweets, we decide to have only one piece every night after dinner. By the time the box is empty, several weeks later, we have begun to look forward to a sweet treat after dinner. So we buy another box of fancy chocolates, but now 2 pieces at a time seems more reasonable. By the end of the second box, the desire to have something sweet after dinner has become strong enough that we buy a carton of ice cream and an extra one just in case. But we know dinner doesn't seem complete without dessert, and we have a new sugar habit. As we reinforce our habits through repeated action, they become even stronger, veiling our intelligence, dulling our power of discrimination, and heavily influencing our comprehension. As our habits mature, they dominate our decision making ability. Our actions are now driven by our habits. As this process is repeated, our habits are strengthened and deepened until they become so powerful that they drive our thoughts, speech, and action from deep within. At this point, the subtle impressions become a saṁskāra. Saṁskāras are habits embedded so deeply in our mind that they shape our inner world and mold our personality. We all have numberless saṁskāras. Some are strong, others relatively weak. The strongest saṁskāras dominate our mind. influencing and shaping our power of discernment from deep within. These defining attributes of our personality affect our judgment, molding our concepts of right and wrong, good and bad. The term for the most powerful saṁskāras is vāsana, a potent, subtle impression that colors the mind. We see reality through the lens of our vāsanas. This lens distorts our perception of others and ourselves. Thus, the mind is no longer in control. We see only what our vāsanas allow us to see. At this point, the mind has turned into a warehouse of saṁskāras and vāsanas, which are pleasant in part and unpleasant in part, a mixture of desirable and undesirable. The mind now thinks and acts in conformity with our saṁskāras and vāsanas. This kind of mind has no mastery over its own thought process. Our saṁskāras and vāsanas make the decisions about what to think and how to think. Smeared as it is with these powerful, subtle impressions, the mind is unaware of what is going on deep inside and has little control over stopping or changing the direction of its thought. Agitating thoughts make it agitated. Confusing and stupefying thoughts make it confused and stupefied. Put simply, the mind has become the slave of its own creations. This cycle, chakra, from thought process to the formation of subtle impressions and from subtle impressions back to thoughts, is the wheel of karma. This vicious cycle wastes the innate luminosity of our mind but does not destroy its inherent power. Using the inherent power of the mind to intervene and stop this vicious cycle is our birthright. Yoga is the method that allows us to claim and exercise this birthright. Second July 1936. Cohen puts a question to Maharishi Ramana. Should all vasanas, mental habits, be completely overcome before self-realization takes place, or may some remain for self-realization to destroy? Bhagwan Ramana Maharishi replies, vasanas which do not obstruct self-realization remain. In Yoga Vasishtha, two classes of vasanas are distinguished, those of enjoyment and those of bondage. The former remain even after mukti is attained, but the latter are destroyed by it. Attachment is the cause of binding vasanas, but enjoyment without attachment does not bind and continues even in sahaja. Maharishi's Gospel. Devotee, since realization is not possible without vasana akshaya, how am I to realize that state in which the vasanas are effectively destroyed? Maharishi replies, you are in that state now. Devotee, does it mean that by holding on to the self, the vasanas should be destroyed as and when they emerge? Maharishi, they will themselves be destroyed if you remain as you are. Devotee, what prevents the infinite, undifferentiated light of consciousness arising from the heart from revealing itself to the ajnani? Maharishi replied, just as water in the pot reflects the enormous sun within the narrow limits of the pot, even so the vasanas or latent tendencies of the mind of the individual, acting as the reflecting medium, catch the all-pervading infinite light of consciousness arising from the heart and present in the form of a ahem and ahem vritti, reflection, the phenomenon called the mind. Seeing only this reflection, the Ajnani is deluded into the belief that he is a finite being, the Jiva. If the mind becomes introverted through inquiry into the source of aham-vritti, the vasanas become distinct, and in the absence of the reflecting medium, the phenomenon of reflection, namely the mind, also disappears, being absorbed into the light of the one reality, that is the heart. This is the sum and substance of all that an aspirant needs to know. What is imperatively required of him is an earnest and one-pointed inquiry into the source of aham-vritti. Face to face with Sri Ramana Maharishi. 187. Padma and her husband Venkataraman, trustees of TMP Mahadevan, number 25. Trust Chennai, are devotees of Sri Ramana. With my husband I went to see Bhagwan in 1947. After prostrating, we stood near him. I said, Bhagwan, I want Atma saṁskāram, self-realization. Bhagwan looked at me and smilingly asked, Apadhya, is it so? The way Bhagwan asked me took my breath away. It was so charming. Then my husband said, she wants to stay here permanently. Bhagwan did not say anything but looked at me steadily, pouring forth his grace. I used to sit in the hall spellbound for many hours, such was his power. While engaged in meditation, old memories would well up in my mind and disturb the flow of meditation. I wanted to find a way out to quench all the vasanas. One day I got an opportunity to put my problem before Bhagwan. His reply was, you be the subject instead of the object, then the vasanas would not trouble you anymore. This suggestion and his grace worked for me. Day by day with Bhagwan. 2nd January 1946 afternoon. Mr. Joshi has submitted what Bhagwan calls a question paper and Bhagwan answers the same. First, about the Jnanis doing work without the mind. You imagine one cannot do work if the mind is killed. Why do you suppose that it is the mind alone that can make one to do work? There may be other causes which can also produce activity. Look at this clock, for instance, it is working without a mind. Again, suppose we say the Jnani has a mind. His mind is very different from the ordinary man's mind. He is like the man who is hearing a story told with his mind all on some distant object. The mind rid of vasanas, though doing work, is not doing work. On the other hand, if the mind is full of vasanas, it is doing work even if the body is not active or moving. 11th January 1946 afternoon, a young man from Colombo asked Bhagwan, J. Krishnamurti teaches the method of effortless and choiceless awareness as distinct from that of deliberate concentration. Would Sri Bhagwan be pleased to explain how best to practice meditation and what form the object of meditation should take? Bhagwan, effortless and choiceless awareness is our real nature. If we can attain it or be in that state, it is all right, but one cannot reach it without effort, the effort of deliberate meditation. All the age-long vasanas carry the mind outward and turn it to external objects. All such thoughts have to be given up and the mind turned inward. For that effort is necessary for most people. Of course, every book says be quiet or still, but it is not easy. That's why all this effort is necessary. Even if we find one who has at once achieved the mona or supreme state indicated by be quiet or still, You may take it that the effort necessary has already been finished in a previous life, so that effortless and choiceless awareness is reached only after deliberate meditation. That meditation can take any form which appeals to you best. See what helps you to keep away all other thoughts and adopt that method for your meditation. In this connection, Bhagwan quoted verse 5 and 52 from Udal Poyavu and 36 from Payayapuli of Saint Thayu Manwar. Their gist is as follows: bliss will follow if you are still. But however much you may tell your mind about this truth, the mind will not keep quiet. It is the mind that won't keep quiet. It is the mind which tells the mind, be quiet and you will attain bliss. Though all the scriptures have said it, though we hear about it every day from the great ones, and though even our Guru says it, we never are quiet, but stray into the world of Maya and sense objects. That's why conscious deliberate effort or meditation is required to attain that mauna state or the state of being quiet. 29th January 1946 afternoon. The visitor said, I am a grahastha, still I want to practice brahmacharya even with my wife, but I am not able to succeed. What should I do? Bhagwan replied, that is because of age-long vasanas. The sankalpas are so powerful because they have existed so long, but they will go. 12th April 1946 afternoon. Question 4. What is the best way of dealing with desires with a view to getting rid of them? Satisfying them or suppressing them? Bhagwan replies, if a desire can be got rid of by satisfying it, there will be no harm in satisfying such a desire. But desires generally are not eradicated by satisfaction. Trying to root them out that way is like pouring spirits to quench fire. At the same time, the proper remedy is not forcible suppression, since such repression is bound to react sooner or later into the forceful surging up of with undesirable consequences. The proper way to get rid of a desire is to find out who gets the desire, what is its source. When this is found, the desire is rooted out and it will never again emerge or grow. Small desires such as the desire to eat, drink and sleep and attend to calls of nature, though these may also be classed among desires you can safely satisfy, they will not implant vasanas in your mind, necessitating further birth. Those activities are just necessary to carry on life and are not likely to develop or leave behind vasanas or tendencies. As a general rule, therefore, there is no harm in satisfying a desire where the satisfaction will not lead to further desires by creating vasanas in the mind. 1st June 1946 afternoon. In the afternoon, Bhagwan explained in answer to Mr. H.C. Khanna of Kanpur, why should your occupation or duties in life interfere with your spiritual effort? For instance, there is a difference between your activities at home and in the office. In your office activities, you are detached, and so long as you do your duty, you do not care what happens or whether it results in gain or loss to the employer. But your duty at home are performed with attachment, and you are all the time anxious as to whether they will bring advantage or disadvantage to you and your family. But it is possible to perform all the activities of life with detachment and regard only the self as a real. It is wrong to suppose that if one is fixed in the self, one's duties in life will not be properly performed. It is like an actor. He dresses and acts and even feels the part he is playing, but he knows really that he is not that character, but someone else in real life. In the same way,
Why should the body consciousness or the feeling I am the body disturb you once you know for certain that you are not the body but the self? Nothing that the body does should shake you from abidance in the self. Such abidance will never interfere with the proper and effective discharge of whatever duties the body has, any more than the actor's being aware of his real status in life interferes with his acting a part on the stage. You ask whether you can tell yourself, I am not the body but the self. Of course, whenever you feel tempted to identify yourself with the body, as you may often have to, owing to old vasanas, it may be a help to remind yourself that you are not the body but the self. But you should not make such repetition a mantram, constantly saying, I am not the body but the self. By proper inquiry into the self, the notion I am this body will gradually vanish, and in time the faith that you are the self will become unshakable. 26th June 1946. A little later, Khanna, handed Bhagwan a piece of paper on which he had written something. After reading it, Bhagwan said, it is a complaint. He says, I have been coming to you, and this time I have remained nearly a month at your feet, and I find no improvement at all in my condition. My vasanas are as strong as ever. When I go back, my friends will laugh at me and ask what good my stay here has done me. Then turning to Khanna, Bhagavan said, why distress your mind by thinking that jnana has not come or that the vasanas have not disappeared? Don't give room for thoughts. In the last stanza of Sukavari, Bayuthayun Manawar, the saint says much the same as is written on this paper. And Bhagwan made me, a Devraja Mudalia, read the stanza and translate into English for the benefit of those who do not know Tamil. It goes, the mind mocks me, and though I tell you 10,000 times you are indifferent, so how am I to attain peace and bliss? Then I said to Khanna, you are not the only one who complains to Bhagwan like this. I have more than one complaint in the same way, and I still do, for I find no improvement in myself. Khanna replied, it is not only that I find no improvement, but I think I have grown worse. The vasanas are stronger now, I cannot understand it. Bhagwan again quoted the last three stanzas of Mandala Thin of Thayun Manovar, where the mind is coaxed as the most generous and disinterested of givers to go back to its birthplace or source and thus give the devotee peace and bliss. And he asked me to read out a translation of it that I once made. The collected works of Sri Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi, Self-Enquiry 12. Devotee. Is self-experience possible for the mind whose nature is constant change? Maharshi replies, since Sattva Guna, the constituent of Prakriti, which makes for purity, intelligence, etc., is the nature of mind, and since the mind is pure and undefiled, like ether, what is called mind is in truth of the nature of knowledge. When it stays in that natural, that is pure state, it has not even the name mind. It is only the erroneous knowledge which mistakes one for another, that is called mind. What was originally the pure sattva mind of the nature of pure knowledge forgets its knowledge nature on account of nescience, get transformed into the world under the influence of tamoguna, that is the constituent of prakriti, which makes for dullness, inertness, etc. Being under the influence of rajoguna, that is the constituent of prakriti, which makes for activity, passions, etc. imagines I am the body, etc. The world is real. It acquires the consequent merit and demerit through attachment, aversion, etc. And through the residual impressions, vasanas thereof attain birth and death. But the mind which has got rid of its defilement, sin, through action without attachment performed in many past lives, listens to the teaching of scripture from a true guru, reflects on its meaning and meditates in order to gain the natural state of mental moods of form of self, that is of the form I am Brahma, which is the result of continued contemplation of Brahma. Thus will be removed the mind's transformation into the world in the aspect of tamoguna and its roving there in the aspect of rajoguna. When this removal takes place, the mind becomes subtle and unmoving. It is only by the mind that is impure and is under the influence of rajas and tamas that reality, that is the self, which is very subtle and unchanging, cannot be experienced. Just as a piece of fine silk cloth cannot be stitched with a heavy crowbar, or as the details of subtle objects cannot be distinguished by the light of a lamp flame that flickers in the wind, but in the pure mind that has been rendered subtle and unmoving by the meditation described above, the self-belief, that is Brahma, will become manifest, as without mind there cannot be experience. It is possible for the purified mind endowed with the extremely subtle mode virati to experience the self-bliss by remaining in that form, that is in the form of Brahma. Then and that one's self is out of the nature of Brahma will be clearly experienced. Self-inquiry 13. Devotee. When there is activity in regard to works, we are neither the agents of those works nor their enjoyers. The activity is of the three instruments, that is the mind, speech and body. Could we remain unattached thinking thus? Mercy. After the mind has been made to stay in the self, which is its deity, and has been rendered indifferent to empirical matters because it does not stray away from the self, how can the mind think as mentioned above? Do not such thoughts constitute bondage? When such thoughts arise due to residual impressions, vasanas, one should restrain the mind from flowing that way, endeavor to retain it in the self state and make it turn indifferent and empirical matters. One should not give room in the mind for such thoughts as, is this good or is that good? Can this be done or can that be done? One should be vigilant even before such thoughts arise and make the mind stay in its native state. If any little room is given, such a disturbed mind will do harm to us while posing as our friend. Like the foe appearing to be a friend, it will topple us down. Is it not because one forgets one's self that such thoughts arise and cause more and more evil? While it is true that to think through discrimination, I do not do anything, all actions are performed by the instruments, is a means to prevent the mind from flowing along thought vasanas. Does it not also follow that only if the mind flows along the thought vasanas that it must be restrained through discrimination as stated before? Can the mind that remains in the self state think as I, and as I behave empirically thus and thus? In all manner of ways possible, one should endeavor gradually not to forget one's true self, that is God. If that is accomplished, all will be accomplished. The mind should not be directed to any other matter. Even though one may perform like a mad person the actions that are the result of prarabdha karma, one should retain the mind in the self state without letting the thought I do arise. Have not countless bhaktas, devotees, performed their numerous empirical functions with an attitude of indifference? Spiritual instruction 26. Devotee, just as the sage's past karma is the cause of his present activities, will not the impressions, vasanas caused by his present activities adhere to him in future? Mercy, only one who is free from all the latent tendencies, vasanas, Jijay says. That being so, how can the tendencies of karma affect him who is entirely unattached to activity? Devika Lotra 68. One must engage unfailingly in yoga, the practice of self-avoidance in all conditions without allowing any special event to affect one adversely if due to doubts. Delusion arises in the form of attraction to worship in holy places and temples on account of past practices and vasanas. Reject it immediately. Atma Bodha 37. Long constant practice of I am Brahma only destroys all vasanas, latent tendencies born of ignorance as an efficacious remedy. Rasayana eradicates a disease. Viveka Chudamani. Although a man knows this to be true, the feeling of I am the doer, I am the enjoyer arises strongly in him owing to the bondage, saṁskāra caused by the mighty beginningless vasanas, innate tendencies, which often obstruct him. Curb these tendencies the moment they arise, but your own effort by abiding firmly in the self, by a vision of the self. Sages such as Vasishtha have declared that the withering of the vasanas is indeed liberation. Realization of the self as it is does not come through tendencies to worldly or sense activity or through prolonged study of the scriptures. To those who seek deliverance from the prison or action of samsara, the above threefold tendencies are iron fetters, say those who are realized. Therefore, attachment to the world, the scriptures, and the body must be given up, and it must be fully realized that the body is sustained by the force of prarabdha, past karma. You should therefore courageously renounce these attachments and strive energetically to overcome tamas by the power of sattva and rajas, then rajas through mixed sattva, then mixed sattva through pure sattva. You should do this with a firm and calm mind, helped by the great texts such as that thou art, which proclaim the identity between the individual self and Brahma. Seek by reasoning and experience to get rid of the vasanas so that you may have faith in Brahma and completely root out from the body and senses the feeling of I and mine, which constantly appear as a result of the superimposition. This is to be done by firm abidance in the one indivisible self in the heart and by meditating on the unceasing experience of knowledge of the unity of Dharma and self. Thus, I am not the ego. I am the unceasing perfection of Dharma experienced as I, the witness of thought forms. This meditation must be persisted in until the ego sense is completely rooted out from the body without a vestige and the world of individuals appear like a dream. He who meditates has no work to do except beg and perform his natural functions. He must never forget the self by giving room for worldly speech and sense objects. Sandalwood is fragrant by nature, but its fragrance is masked by a bad smell when it comes into contact with water and is revealed when it is rubbed. constant practice of meditation is this rubbing. The latent tendencies, vasanas of the mind are removed only to the extent to which it abides in the self. It is by such constant abidance in the self that the mind of the yogi is destroyed, and by the destruction of the mind, the outer non-self tendencies of the heart are utterly eradicated. Then the experience of the Supreme Self, which was formerly veiled by the magic of the Vasanas, shines forth of its own accord like the fragrance of uncontaminated sandal paste. All forms of creation and imagination appearing as you, I, this, etc., are a result of impurity of the intellect. They seem to exist in the absolute, attributeless Supreme Self, but in the state of absorption, samadhi, and experience of Brahma, they cease to exist. Also, the Self seems to be divisible owing to differences in the vehicles. But if these are removed, it shines single and complete. Perpetual concentration is necessary in order to dissolve these differentiations in the absolute. The vast garb that renounces all activity and meditates constantly upon the vast becomes a vasp, and in the same way the soul that longs for Brahma with one-pointed meditation becomes the Supreme Self through the power of its meditation and perpetual abidance in Brahma in the absolute stillness. So, persevere constantly in meditation on Brahma, and as a result the mind will be cleansed of the strain of the three gunas until it becomes perfectly pure and resumes its state when it is ripe for dissolution in Brahma like salt in water. It is like gold being cleansed of its alloy and returning to the purity of its true state through being put in a furnace. Only in such purity of mind can nirvikalpa samadhi be obtained, and therewith the essential bliss of identity. Through this samadhi, all the knots of the vasanas are loosened and all past karmas destroyed, so that the light of the self is experienced without effort, inwardly and outwardly, and at all places and time. The subtle Brahma Thus the subtle Brahma is experienced in the single and subtle mental mode of samadhi by those of subtle intellect, and in no other way. By no gross outlook can it be experienced. Similarly, the sage who has inner and outer senses controlled in solitude and equanimity obtains the experience of the all-pervading self through perpetual concentration, and thus getting rid of all mental creations caused by the darkness of ignorance, becomes actionless and without attributes, and remains eternally in the bliss of Brahma himself. Only he is liberated from the bondage of saṁskāra, who, having obtained nirvikalpa samadhi, perceives the mind, senses, and objects, the ears and sound, etc., to inhere in the self, and not he who speaks only from the theoretical wisdom. Brahma can be clearly experienced without any barrier only through nirvikalpa samadhi. For apart from that, the mental modes always fluctuates, leading from one thought to another. Therefore, control the senses and mind and abide firmly in the self. Utterly destroy the darkness of ignorance and its cause through experience of the one self, and abide ever as the self. Reflection on truth heard is 100 times more potent than hearing it, and abiding in it is 100,000 times more potent than reflection on it. What limit then can there be to the potency obtained through nirvikalpa samadhi? Dik drishya viveka, buddhi, as the sum total of the inner organs in contact with the reflected consciousness, has two aspects. One is called egoity and the other mind. This contact of the buddhi with the reflected consciousness is like the identity of red hot iron ball with fire, As the gross body passes for a conscious entity, the contact establishing identity between the ego and the reflected consciousness is of three kinds. Number one, the identification of the ego with the reflected consciousness is natural or innate. Second, the identification of the ego with the body is due to past karma. 3. The identification of the ego with the witness is due to ignorance. The natural or innate contact continues as long as the buddhi, but on realization of the self it proves to be false. The third mentioned contact is broken when it is discovered by experience that there is no sort of contact of anything at all with the self which is being. The second mentioned contact, that born of past karma, ceases to exist on the destruction of innate tendencies, vasanas. In the deep sleep state, when the body is inert, the ego is fully merged in the causal ignorance. The ego is half manifest in the dream state, and its being fully manifest is the waking state. It is the mode or modification of thought with its latent tendencies that create the inner world of dreams in the dream state and the outer world in the waking state. The subtle body, which is the material cause of mind and ego, experiences the three states and also birth and death, the heart and the brain. 7. So the atom-like vasanas in the heart are made gross by the lens of the brain, go out through the eyes, mouth and nose and so on. That is through the five senses, and appear in space as wonderful pictures of many kinds. So this video comes to an end. Thanks a lot, my dear friends. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks. Namaskar, my dear friends.